I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Trader Joe's when my phone rang. Unknown number, 202 area code. I almost didn't answer. I was tired. I'd just finished a double shift, and I had a cart full of groceries melting in the trunk. But something made me pick up. I don't know what. Call it instinct. Call it fate. Call it whatever you want.
Is this Claire Renner?
I said yes. This is Special Agent Derek Moss with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. My heart stopped. I literally felt it stop. Were you aware, he said slowly, carefully, like he was choosing every single word, that Claire Renner died on February 14th, 1999? The groceries in my trunk melted completely that day. I sat in that parking lot for 3 hours. Because the date he gave me, February 14th, 1999, that's my birthday. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe to Betrayal Ledger for more. Hi, I'm Claire. Well, that's the name I've gone by my entire life. Whether it's actually my name is, honestly, still something I'm working through. I'm 31 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon. I work as a pediatric occupational therapist, which means I spend my days helping kids rewire their brains, build new pathways, learn to trust their own bodies. There is something deeply ironic about that, given everything I'm about to tell you. Because for most of my life, I didn't know who I actually was. Before all of this came out, before that phone call in the Trader Joe's parking lot, I would have described my life as fine. Honestly, just fine. I had a decent apartment. I had a job I loved. I had a best friend named Priya who made me laugh so hard I once pulled a muscle. I had a cat named Dustin Hoffman, who I'm convinced has human eyes. What I also had, and this is the part I didn't talk about much, was a mother I'd been quietly avoiding for about 2 years. We'll get to her, but first, let me take you back. Way back. Because this story doesn't start in that parking lot, and it doesn't start with that phone call. It starts in a hospital in Tucson, Arizona, on Valentine's Day, 1999, with a woman who had been planning something for a very, very long time. Growing up, I thought my childhood was normal. I know that's what everybody says, but I genuinely did. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. We lived in a mid-sized house in a suburb of Phoenix. Beige walls, terracotta pots out front, a lemon tree in the backyard that my mom was obsessed with. She made lemonade every summer and told everyone she'd won awards for it, which was absolutely not true, but she believed it. And back then, I believed most things she told me. My mom's name is Sandra Renner. She was, and still is, as far as I know, a compact, neat woman with dark hair she kept in a bob for as long as I can remember. She had this way of moving through a room like she was always being watched. Not nervous, exactly. More like performing. Like every moment of her life was a stage and she was the lead actress who'd been underpaid and underappreciated her whole career. She worked as an office manager for a dental practice for most of my childhood. She was good at her job. Organized. Precise. The kind of woman who color-coded her spice rack and filed receipts from the grocery store. My dad, her ex-husband Gary, left when I was 4. I barely remember him. Sandra didn't talk about him much except to say he was a disappointment, which was her word for any man who'd ever let her down. There were several of those over the years. She dated on and off, always men who were initially dazzled by her and then slowly, quietly pulled away. I watched that pattern repeat itself so many times that by the time I was in high school, I could practically set a timer on a new relationship. But she had me. And I was her project. I don't mean that in a cruel way. Not yet, not back then. I mean that Sandra poured everything she had into shaping me. What I wore, what I read, what I ate, who I spent time with. She had opinions about everything, and delivered them with such quiet certainty that you just absorbed them. You stopped questioning. It was easier. I was a good student, shy but not painfully so. I had a small group of friends, played clarinet badly for 2 years before quitting, and spent most of my free time reading or watching documentaries about the ocean. I wanted to be a marine biologist until I was about 15, when I realized I'd have to live near the ocean to do that. And Sandra had very firm opinions about us staying in Arizona. We were close, or I thought we were. She knew everything about my life, my grades, my friends, my worries. Looking back, the closeness was very one-directional. She knew everything about me. I knew almost nothing about her. She never talked about her own childhood. I I knew her parents, my grandparents, had died before I was born. I knew she'd grown up somewhere in the Midwest, though the state changed sometimes. Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. I never noticed the inconsistencies when I was young. Kids don't audit their parents. There were no photo albums from her past, no old report cards, no yearbooks, no nostalgic stories about prom or first cars or college roommates. If I asked, she'd deflect with this small, tired smile and say, "The past is the past, Claire Bear. What matters is right now." I believed her. She was my mom, why wouldn't I? Now let me introduce you to the other person at the center of this story. Because Sandra wasn't alone in it. And the second person is someone I didn't even know existed until I was 28 years old. Her name is Janet, but I'll get to Janet in a minute, because first I have to tell you about the summer I turned 23, and the very first crack in the foundation. I was 23 years old when I tried to apply for my first passport. Simple, right? People do it every day. Priya and I were planning a trip to Costa Rica, our first real international trip, and I was giddy with excitement. I went online, filled out the form, gathered my documents, birth certificate, driver's license, a passport photo where I looked mildly alarmed. I mailed everything in and waited. 6 weeks later, I got a letter back. It wasn't a passport. It was a notice saying there was an issue with my application and I needed to contact the National Passport Information Center to resolve it. The language was vague and bureaucratic, and I assumed I'd filled something out wrong, signed in the wrong place, forgot a notarization, something simple. I called. I waited on hold for 40 minutes, and then a woman named Linda told me, very matter-of-factly, that there appeared to be a discrepancy in my birth records, and they needed additional documentation to verify my identity. Discrepancy. I didn't know what that meant. I asked her to clarify. She said she couldn't discuss specifics over the phone and that I should visit my local passport acceptance facility with additional forms of ID. I went. I brought everything I had, my birth certificate, social security card, driver's license, my lease, a utility bill. The woman behind the counter looked at my birth certificate for a long time, longer than felt normal. And then she said, very carefully, "Can I make a copy of this?" "Sure," I said. "And can I ask, is this the original document or a certified copy?" I didn't know. Sandra had always handled official documents. She kept them in a fireproof lockbox in her closet, and when I'd needed my birth certificate for college applications, she'd handed me a laminated copy and told me to keep it safe. I'd always assumed it was the real thing. They kept my birth certificate that day. They gave me a receipt and told me they'd be in touch. When I called Sandra to tell her what happened, there was a pause on the line. Brief, just a second. But I remember it now. I remember it the way you remember a specific frame from a dream. Out of context at the time. Devastatingly clear in hindsight. "That's so strange," she said. "These government agencies are so incompetent. I'll look into it." And then she changed the subject. The passport situation dragged on for months. Every time I tried to follow up, I hit a wall. New requests for documentation. Vague explanations, referrals to different departments. Sandra always had a reason for the delay, always had an explanation that made sense in the moment. The original birth certificate had water damage. That's why there was a discrepancy. The hospital had closed. Records were hard to trace. Government bureaucracy was just slow. She'd handle it. She always handled everything. Costa Rica didn't happen. Priya was gracious about it. We went to Seattle instead and ate our body weight in seafood. And I tried to put the whole passport thing out of my mind. But here's the thing about nagging feelings. They don't go away just because you ignore them. They go underground. They wait. I didn't apply for another passport for 5 years. In those 5 years, my relationship with Sandra began its long, slow deterioration. It didn't happen because of the passport. It happened because I grew up. Because therapy, which I started at 25 after a difficult breakup, gave me a language for things I'd felt for years but never been able to name. My therapist, a calm and wonderfully unshockable woman named Dr. Ewan, helped me see patterns in my relationship with my mother that I'd always accepted as normal. The constant subtle criticism dressed as concern. The way Sandra could make me feel guilty for having a good day she wasn't part of. The way she inserted herself into every major decision in my life. And the cold, punishing withdrawal when I made choices she didn't approve of. When I got the job in Portland and told her I was moving, she didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When she did call back, she said very calmly, I just worry about you being so far away. What if something happens? I'll be okay, Mom. You don't know that. Control dressed as love. That's what Dr. Ewan called it. And once I could see it, I couldn't unsee it. By 28, I was living in Portland. I was working as a therapist, and I was talking to Sandra maybe twice a month. Enough to maintain the relationship. Not enough to let her fully back into my nervous system. And that's when I decided to try for the passport again. I'm not even sure why. I wasn't planning a trip. It just felt like something I needed to do. Something unresolved that I wanted to resolve on my own, without Sandra handling it. This time, I went about it differently. I requested my own vital records directly from the Arizona Department of Health. I used my social security number, my driver's license, my full legal name and date of birth. What came back was not what I expected. I need you to stay with me here, because this is the part where everything starts unraveling. The Arizona Department of Health had no birth record for a Claire Marie Renner, born February 14th, 1999. None. I stared at that letter for so long that the words stopped looking like words. I read it 6 times. 7. I called the number on the letterhead and spoke to a records clerk who confirmed that their database showed no match for my name and date of birth. Is it possible the record is under a different spelling? He asked. I spelled out every variation I could think of. Renner, Renair, Claire, Clara, Marie, Maria. Nothing. Is there any chance, he said carefully, that you might have been born in a different state? Sandra had always said I was born in Tucson, St. Mary's Hospital, Tucson, Arizona. She'd told me that story dozens of times, how she'd gone into labor on Valentine's Day, how the nurses had given her a little heart-shaped box of chocolates, how she'd held me for the first time and known she'd never love anything more. I thanked the records clerk and hung up. And then I sat very still in my apartment while Dustin Hoffman climbed onto my lap and stared at me with his unsettling human eyes. Something was very, very wrong. I want to pause here for a second, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, maybe it was just a clerical error. Maybe records got lost. Maybe there was a legitimate explanation. And I want you to know, I thought those things too. I held on to those explanations hard, because the alternative was something my brain was not ready to process. But here's what I did next, and I want you to remember this detail, because it matters later. I called Sandra. Hey Mom, I have kind of a weird question. Of course. What's wrong? She always assumed something was wrong when I called unexpectedly. Another pattern Dr. Ewan had flagged. I was looking into my birth records, just trying to get my passport sorted out finally. And I'm having trouble finding the records in Arizona. Is there any chance I was born somewhere else? Or that the hospital information is different than what you told me? The pause this time was longer. Why are you looking into that yourself? I told you I'd take care of the passport. I know, Mom, but it's been 5 years. I just wanted to handle it. Claire. Her voice shifted into that particular register. Not quite cold, but pointed. The voice that said, "You're being difficult. I don't understand why you're doing this. You don't need a passport right now, do you?" That's not really the point. I have all of your documents. Everything is fine. I don't know why you're going around stirring things up. Stirring things up? That phrase hit me funny. Still does. I told her I just wanted to understand the discrepancy. She told me I was making a big deal out of nothing, that she'd look into it, that I should just trust her. I said okay. I hung up, and I hired a private genealogist. Her name was Renata, and she came recommended through an online forum for adult adoptees, which I wasn't, as far as I knew, but I didn't know where else to look. She was efficient, methodical, and completely non-judgmental, which I appreciated because I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I gave her everything I had: my name, my date of birth, my social security number, Sandra's name, the hospital in Tucson. I told her I was trying to verify my birth records, and I'd hit walls at every official channel. She called me back 2 weeks later. "Claire," she said, "I found something." I remember pressing the phone against my ear so hard it left a mark. There is a record of a Claire Marie Renner born February 14th, 1999 in Tucson, Arizona. I exhaled. Oh, thank God. Okay, so that Claire Marie Renner died 4 days later, February 18th, 1999. She was born with a severe heart defect. She never left the hospital. The room tilted. What? The social security number associated with your name was originally issued to that infant, Renata said quietly. It was never officially transferred or reissued, which means the identity you've been using your entire life belongs to a child who died 28 years ago. I don't remember the rest of that phone call. I know I said something. I know she said something. I know at some point I thanked her and hung up. I sat on my bathroom floor for a very long time, and the question that kept circling, louder and louder, like an alarm I couldn't shut off. If I'm not Claire Renner, then who am I? Here's the thing about discovering that your entire identity might be a fabrication. You don't tell people right away. Or at least I didn't. I went to work. I fed Dustin Hoffman. I went through the motions of my life while my brain tried to build a new framework for reality. I called Dr. Ewan, who helped me breathe. I called Priya, who said, "What the actual," and then spent 3 hours on the phone with me running through every possible explanation. We went through all of them. All the innocent ones, adoption gone wrong, clerical error, some bizarre hospital mix-up, but we kept coming back to the same problem. Sandra. Sandra, who had deflected every question about my birth. Sandra, who had handled my documents for my entire life. Sandra, who had given me a laminated copy of a birth certificate and never let me touch the originals. Sandra, who had flinched. And yes, looking back, it was a flinch, every time I got close to pulling this thread. I needed to confront her. I knew that. But I also needed more information because I knew Sandra. I knew that if I came to her with half a story, she'd fill the rest of it in for me, and I'd never know what was true. So I kept digging. Renata helped me. She found something extraordinary. Or rather, she found the absence of something extraordinary. There was no documented record of Sandra Renner giving birth to any child, ever. Her medical records, what we could access, showed no pregnancies, no obstetric visits in 1998 or 1999. Nothing. And here's where Janet comes in. Renata found Janet through a combination of newspaper archives and genealogical databases. An obituary from 2019, a woman in rural Ohio named Janet Cowell, who'd died of ovarian cancer at 54. The obituary listed her survivors. It listed, among them, a daughter. A daughter named Claire, born February 14, 1999. But it also included a line, a devastatingly ordinary line, that the person writing it probably thought nothing of. Claire was estranged from her mother for many years and was not present for Janet's passing. I read that sentence 4 times. I was not present for her passing. Because I didn't know she existed, Renata cross-referenced Janet Cowell with Sandra Renner and found a connection I never would have found on my own. They'd grown up in the same small town in Ohio. They'd gone to the same high school, roughly the same graduation year. There were local newspaper records, a sports mention, a school event listing, that placed them together as teenagers. Sandra had known Janet, had known her for years, most likely, and somehow one of Janet's children had ended up being raised as Sandra's daughter. What happened between them? I still don't know all of it. I want to be honest with you about that. Some of this story has gaps I've had to accept may never be filled. But what the FBI eventually pieced together, and yes, I'm getting to the FBI, I promise, was this. Janet Cowell had been a young, single woman who'd gotten pregnant in 1998. She was struggling. She had no stable income, no partner, no support system. She and Sandra had apparently reconnected, or maybe stayed in touch, or found each other again, during the pregnancy. And at some point they made an arrangement. I don't know if money changed hands. I don't know if it started as something Sandra intended to make legal and then didn't. I don't know if Janet changed her mind at some point and felt she had no recourse. I don't know how much was desperation and how much was calculation on Sandra's part. What I do know is this. Sandra did not steal a random child's identity. She stole my identity, the one I was born with. She took me from my biological mother and gave me a dead baby's name and a social security number that wasn't mine. And she built a life on top of it. A life that was also in almost every meaningful way mine. She raised me. She was there for every first day of school, every fever, every nightmare. She taught me to drive and cried at my college graduation and called me every Sunday for years. None of that was fake. And all of it was built on something criminal. I flew to Phoenix. I did not warn her I was coming. She answered the door in her bathrobe, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, something moved across her face. Not surprise. More like recognition. Like she'd been waiting for this knock for 30 years. "Claire," she said. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside. I sat down at her kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten breakfast at for 18 years, and I looked at her and I said, "I know." She didn't ask what I knew. She didn't try to deflect. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table and looked at them for a very long time. "How much?" she finally asked. "Enough. Mom." The word came out strange. "Enough to know that's not what you are, not legally." She looked up at me. Her eyes were dry, which somehow made it worse. "I always loved you," she said. I felt something crack open in my chest. "I know you did," I said. "I actually believe that. But that doesn't make what you did okay. You know that, right? You have to know that." She looked back at her hands. "Janet couldn't take care of you," she said, and her voice was so quiet I had to lean forward to hear it. "She was a mess. I don't know what she would have done. I thought I was helping." "You could have adopted me legally." "Silence." "You could have. There are systems, there are processes. Why didn't you?" More silence, longer this time, and that's when I understood. There was a reason Sandra couldn't pursue legal adoption. A reason she needed to stay invisible, to keep the paper trail murky, to maintain total control over the narrative. I didn't know the full reason yet, but I felt it in the room with us. Something she wasn't saying, something old and heavy and complicated that she'd been carrying since before I was born. I asked her about Janet. She confirmed it. Yes, she'd known her. Yes, they'd made an arrangement. She said arrangement, the way people say the word when they need something clinical to hide behind. I asked her if Janet had wanted to find me. Sandra looked at the table for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. "She tried," she finally said, "a few times early on." My throat tightened, and I told her you were mine, that we'd agreed, that she needed to leave us alone. I stood up. I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked to the kitchen window and looked at the lemon tree in the backyard, still there, still producing fruit Sandra would never win any awards for. And I let myself feel the full weight of what I was holding. Somewhere in Ohio, a woman had spent decades not knowing where her daughter was. She had died in 2019, 3 years before I found any of this out, with an obituary that called me estranged. I wasn't estranged, I was stolen. Janet died not knowing I was okay, not knowing I'd become someone she might have been proud of, not knowing I spent my days helping children heal and had a ridiculous, beloved cat and a best friend who made me laugh until I hurt. She died without me, and she didn't choose that. I put my hand on the kitchen window and felt the cool glass against my palm, and I cried. I cried for a woman I'd never met and would never know. I cried for the story I was supposed to have, the one that got rewritten before I was old enough to have any say in it. Sandra didn't try to comfort me. I think she knew better. I think in that moment she finally let herself see what she'd done, not through her own justifications, but through the reality of a daughter standing at a window mourning a mother she never got to have. I turned around after a while. My face was a mess. I didn't care. "I need you to tell me everything," I said. "My real name. Everything Janet ever told you. Everything." She told me. My name, the one Janet had chosen, was Caroline. Caroline Ann Cowell. I'm still deciding what to do with that information. And then, 2 weeks after that conversation in Sandra's kitchen, came the call in the Trader Joe's parking lot. Special Agent Derek Moss had been investigating what turned out to be a much larger pattern: identity fraud involving deceased infants, a practice sometimes called tombstoning, that had been flagged by a cross-agency task force looking at Social Security anomalies. My case had surfaced during that investigation. He asked me if I knew that Claire Renner had died in February of 1999. I said, "I do now." He asked if I had any information about how my identity had been established. I told him everything. The conversation lasted 2 hours. I cried twice, which he acknowledged with a patience that I found genuinely kind. He told me that Sandra could face serious federal charges, identity theft, fraud, potentially others depending on what the investigation found. He told me that my own documentation, social security number, passport, professional licenses, would need to be addressed, that I would need to work with multiple agencies to establish my legal identity. "What do I do?" I asked him. I felt like a child asking that. I also felt like it was the most honest question I'd ever asked. What do I do about my name? My whole life is built on this name. There was a pause on his end, and then he said something I didn't expect from a federal agent. "That's not really a legal question, Ms." He stopped. "That's not really a legal question. That's a human one, and I think you'll figure it out." The next 6 months were, without question, the most administratively exhausting and emotionally complex of my life. I'm going to tell you what that actually looked like, because I think it's important to be real about it. I hired an attorney, a woman named Deborah who specialized in identity law and was about as warm as a parking meter but absolutely excellent at her job. We worked with the Social Security Administration, the State Department, the Arizona Vital Records Office, and Oregon state agencies to establish what Deborah called my documented identity. Essentially, proving I existed and was a real person and could legally function in the world. I was allowed to keep the name Claire. It required documentation and a legal process, but it was possible, in part because I'd held this identity for 30 years, and in part because the original Claire Renner had no surviving family members who objected. Her parents had both died years before. There was no one to contest it. I still wrestle with that. Using a dead baby's name, even with legal permission, even with a new legitimate identity constructed around it, it sits in me somewhere complicated. I kept Claire. I dropped Renner. After a great deal of thought, I added Cowell, my biological mother's surname, as my legal surname. I am, legally, Claire Cowell now. It felt like the most honest thing I could do. A bridge between two worlds, two women, two stories. As for Sandra, she was charged. I'm not going to pretend I had no part in that. I cooperated with the investigation fully. She pled guilty to several counts of identity fraud and document fraud. She was 61 years old, no prior criminal record, and her attorney argued extensively about the circumstances. She did not go to prison. She received a significant fine, probation, and a federal record that will follow her for the rest of her life. I went to Janet's grave. I flew to Ohio last spring, to a small town outside Columbus, and I stood in front of a modest headstone in a cemetery surrounded by flat land and gray sky, and I introduced myself. Not as Claire, as Caroline. Just once. I let myself be Caroline there, with no one watching. I left flowers. I stayed for a while. I told her about my job, about Dustin Hoffman, about Priya, and the trip to Costa Rica we'd finally taken. I got the passport. It was a whole ordeal, but I got it. I told her I was okay. I told her I hoped she'd known somehow that I was okay. I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing, but I needed to say it. I have a half-sibling, it turns out. Janet had a son, Marcus, from a different relationship, who was raised by his own father and didn't know about me either. We've been in tentative contact. He seems like a good person. We're both trying to figure out what, if anything, we can be to each other. It's slow and careful and awkward, and I think maybe that's okay. Some things don't have to move fast. And Sandra, I haven't ended the relationship entirely. I know some people reading this will think I should have. I understand that. But it's complicated doesn't even cover it. She is the person who raised me. The person who held my hand during my childhood nightmares. The person who, somewhere in the wreckage of all her wrong decisions, genuinely loved me. She also robbed me of my history, my biological mother, my name, my ability to know where I came from. I see her sometimes. We talk on the phone occasionally. It's not what it was, and it never will be again. There's a thick pane of glass between us now. I can see her, I can hear her, but I can't let her all the way in. Not anymore. She asked me once, about 8 months after the legal case resolved, if I could ever forgive her. I told her I didn't know. I told her forgiveness wasn't something I was pursuing for her sake, and if it came, it would come for mine. She said that was fair. I think it was the most honest exchange we ever had. It's been about 2.5 years since that phone call in the Trader Joe's parking lot. My legal identity is established and stable. I travel internationally now. I've been to Costa Rica, Scotland, and Japan in the last 2 years alone, as if I'm making up for lost time. Maybe I am. The passport has my photo and my new name, and every time I hand it to a customs agent, I feel something I can only describe as real. Like I've earned my place in the record of the world. Professionally, I'm still doing the same work. Pediatric OT, helping kids learn to navigate their own bodies and minds. I've become increasingly interested in the intersection of trauma and identity, for obvious reasons, and I'm in the early stages of exploring a graduate research project on that topic. Dustin Hoffman is 17 now and deeply unwell. He's on 3 medications and still manages to judge me daily. I love him more than is reasonable. Priya is still my best friend. She was the first person I told about Janet, about the FBI call, about all of it. She sat on the floor of my apartment with me for an entire weekend while I processed. And she asked exactly the right questions and said exactly the right things. And also, brought enough Thai food to feed a small nation. That's what a good friend looks like. I want you to know I'm aware of how lucky I am. I went back to therapy with Dr. Ewan, who I think has genuinely seen everything now. We've been doing what she calls identity reconstruction work, which sounds clinical but is actually just figuring out who you are when the story you were given isn't the full story. Figuring out how to hold multiple truths at once. I was raised by a woman who did something unforgivable. I also had a good childhood in many ways. I am the daughter of a woman I never met. And I am also undeniably the daughter of Sandra Renner. I am Claire and I am Caroline and I am both, and I am neither, and some days that's fine and some days it isn't. I've thought a lot about what I believe about identity, about what makes us who we are. I used to think it was where we came from, genetics, roots, origin stories. Now I think it's more complicated than that. I think it's partly where you come from and partly what was done to you and partly, maybe mostly, what you choose to do with all of it. I chose to find the truth, even when the truth was devastating. I chose to give Janet her name back in the only way I could. I chose to show up to my own life, the real one, the documented one, the one that's actually mine, and keep building it, even when the foundation had to be torn up and relaid. I don't think my story has a neat ending. I'm not sure it ever will. There are still questions I can't answer, gaps in the record that no amount of investigation will fill. I will never know what Janet and Sandra said to each other when they made their arrangement. I will never know if Janet thought about me on my birthdays. I will never know the version of my life that existed in a parallel world, where none of this happened, but I know who I am today. And for the first time in my life, that knowledge belongs entirely to me. No one gave it to me. No one shaped it or managed it or handed it to me in a laminated copy and said, "Trust me." I found it myself. That matters to me more than I know how to say. If you've made it to the end of this, thank you. Genuinely. I know this was a lot. It's a lot for me too, still, even now. Every time I sit down to talk about it, I find something new to feel. I've shared this story because I think there are a lot of people out there carrying questions about their identities, whether it's something as extreme as what happened to me, or something quieter, more private. Questions about who you are when the story you were told about yourself turns out to be incomplete. When the people you trusted most kept things from you. When you have to decide what to do with love that comes wrapped in harm. I don't have a universal answer to any of that. I just have my story, and the hope that sharing it means something to someone. I want to ask you something, and I really do want to know. Drop it in the comments, because I read them, every one of them, when I can. Have you ever discovered something that completely reframed how you understood your own past? Maybe it wasn't anything like this. Maybe it was something smaller, a secret a parent kept, a truth that came out years too late. How did you handle it? Did you confront it head-on, or did you need time to sit with it first? And if you were in my position, standing at the kitchen window, staring at a lemon tree, finding out that the name you'd answered to your whole life belonged to someone else, what would you have done? What would you have done about Sandra? I'm genuinely asking. Because I still don't know some days if I made all the right choices. I just made the choices I could live with. That's all any of us can do, I think. Take care of yourselves and take care of your identity, because it's yours. No one else has the right to it. I'll see you in the next one.